In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a man named Ethan had finally achieved his dream home. It wasn't extravagant, but it was his pride, a modest house with a beautiful stone driveway leading to a garage he had built with his own hands. For years, he had lived peacefully, taking care of his property, maintaining his garden, and helping his neighbors whenever he could. But peace never lasts long in a neighborhood ruled by an HOA that thrives on control. The trouble began the day the new HOA president moved in, a woman named Carol, who believed her mission was to restore order to the community. To her, everything had to follow a strict rulebook, and she took pleasure in enforcing it. Within weeks, residents began whispering about her constant complaints, grass height, mailbox color, fence shape, and eventually, she set her sights on Ethan's driveway. One morning, Ethan received a letter from the HOA claiming his driveway violated community aesthetic standards. Apparently, the color of the paving stones didn't match the approved tone palette. He was ordered to remove it within 30 days or face daily fines. Ethan thought it was a mistake, so he visited the office, hoping for a conversation. But Carol wasn't interested in reasoning, she saw an opportunity to assert her power. The fines started piling up fast. $50 a day for non-compliance, and after a month, hundreds had turned into thousands. Ethan filed an appeal, but the HOA board, mostly Carol's friends, unanimously rejected it. What made it worse was the public notice they sent around the neighborhood, announcing that Ethan's driveway was an ongoing violation. It was humiliating. The stress was constant. Every day, Ethan would return home to see HOA members walking by, taking pictures, inspecting his property like he was a criminal. Even his friendly neighbors began avoiding eye contact, afraid to get involved. But Ethan wasn't the type to break easily. He paid attention, listened quietly. Meanwhile, Carol and her board continued their harassment. They sent more letters, more threats, and even tried to block his car with cones, claiming he couldn't use the non-compliant driveway. Ethan didn't argue. He just watched and waited, smiling politely, while his paperwork quietly moved through county approval. Weeks turned into months, and one morning, Ethan received a confirmation letter. His LLC was now the official owner of several narrow strips of land throughout the community. To anyone else, it looked meaningless, but Ethan knew exactly what it meant. The HOA streets connected to every home through those tiny parcels. Without access rights, the HOA technically had no legal road connection to the properties. He had just gained control over every homeowner's access point, including the one leading to Carol's driveway. But Ethan wasn't ready to reveal his plan yet. He knew timing was everything. He waited until the HOA sent him one final letter, a demand for payment of $8,000 in fines and an order to remove his driveway immediately or face a lawsuit. That was the moment he had been waiting for. He calmly gathered all the letters, photos, and payment receipts, building a neat folder of documentation. Then, with quiet determination, he prepared his final move, not to fight the HOA's system, but to own it entirely. As he watched Carol walk her dog down the street that evening, shouting at another neighbor for a minor violation, Ethan realized that this war was no longer about a driveway. It was about control, and he was about to take it all back. The next morning, he called the county survey office and requested something that would soon turn the entire neighborhood upside down, a private road access evaluation for his newly purchased land strips. It was the first official step toward claiming ownership of every road leading into the HOA. Ethan's request to the county went unnoticed by most of his neighbors. It was a routine document buried deep within the public record system, the kind that no one reads except lawyers and surveyors. To everyone else, life continued as usual: HOA board meetings, complaint letters, and more strict compliance updates. But beneath that calm surface, Ethan's plan was quietly unfolding with precision. Within a few weeks, a county representative arrived to conduct the road access evaluation. The inspector, clipboard in hand, walked through the neighborhood measuring distances, taking photos, and marking boundary points. Carol noticed, of course. From her porch, she watched suspiciously, her arms crossed, wondering why a county official was inspecting her community's roads. By the afternoon, she was already emailing the HOA board demanding answers. None of them had a clue. The HOA had never bothered to verify land boundaries because they assumed everything inside the gates was theirs. But that assumption was about to cost them dearly. When the report was finalized, the results were exactly as Ethan had expected. The HOA's main roads were public property, but the small connecting strips leading to driveways, mailboxes, and even sidewalks were unclaimed land parcels. The county confirmed his ownership through the LLC he created. In the eyes of the law, Ethan's company now controlled the physical access points to every property within the HOA. No one could legally use those roads without easement rights the HOA never bothered to file for. Ethan didn't use this information to threaten anyone. Instead, he played it patiently. He sent the HOA a polite notice through his LLC, explaining that as the new landowner of the connecting parcels, he intended to establish maintenance agreements for community road access. It sounded harmless, almost neighborly, but to Carol, it was a direct challenge to her power. The HOA called an emergency board meeting. Furious and confused, Carol insisted that the notice was a fraudulent stunt. Yet when their attorney checked the county records, he confirmed it. The ownership transfer was legitimate, properly registered, and fully binding. The HOA, for the first time, was powerless to stop something that had already happened. As weeks passed, tension grew in the neighborhood. Ethan continued his normal routine, mowing his lawn and greeting neighbors, while the HOA scrambled behind the scenes trying to figure out what to do. They couldn't fine him anymore. Legally, they were standing on land that wasn't theirs. Even their access to the community gate technically depended on one of Ethan's parcels. The irony was almost poetic. The same HOA that banned Ethan's driveway for aesthetic violations now had to request permission just to drive over his property. When the next HOA newsletter came out, it was unusually defensive. Carol claimed there had been a clerical misunderstanding regarding property boundaries, and assured residents that the issue would be resolved. But the residents weren't so easily convinced. Rumors spread quickly. People started asking questions about their fees, their roads, and whether the HOA had been lying to them all along. Ethan never fueled the rumors directly, but he made sure the truth was accessible. Every document he'd filed was public record. Every legal map clearly showed the ownership transfers. The homeowners started to realize they'd been paying the HOA for maintenance of roads the HOA didn't even own, a revelation that sparked quiet resentment among them. Meanwhile, Carol tried to intimidate Ethan by sending a letter accusing him of sabotaging community order. She demanded he reverse the ownership transfers immediately. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he forwarded her letter to the county's property commission, attaching copies of her earlier fines and threats as evidence of harassment. Within days, Carol received an official warning about misuse of authority and unauthorized fines. The HOA's credibility began to collapse. Meetings became chaotic, with residents questioning every policy. Carol tried to keep control, shouting about neighborhood standards and preserving property values, but her voice was drowned by frustration and disbelief. Ethan's quiet strategy had done what no argument or protest could. It exposed the HOA's arrogance through the system they themselves had created. The same bureaucracy they used to control others now worked against them. Weeks later, Ethan took the next step. He filed for maintenance rights under his LLC to manage the newly owned access roads. The county approved it, meaning that any community maintenance, repair, or construction would now require his company's authorization. He had effectively replaced the HOA's authority over the most essential part of the neighborhood, its roads. This new power gave him leverage, but Ethan wasn't motivated by revenge alone. He wanted to make a point. The HOA had spent years bullying homeowners over minor infractions, charging outrageous fines, and pretending to protect property values while misusing funds. Now, they had to confront their own hypocrisy. The final blow came during the HOA's annual meeting. Ethan attended quietly, sitting in the back while Carol stood at the front, visibly tense. She tried to open the meeting as usual, but when she began discussing the road budget, Ethan raised his hand and calmly presented the official county letter confirming his company's ownership. He explained, in simple terms, that the HOA no longer had the right to manage or charge for the roads. The room went silent. For the first time, the board members realized the scale of what had happened. They couldn't operate without road access, not legally, not financially. Their insurance policies, maintenance contracts, even their mail delivery routes depended on those small parcels of land now under Ethan's control. Carol's face went pale. She tried to argue that the HOA's charter overruled property laws, but no one believed her. The residents had seen enough. They demanded transparency, financial records, and immediate accountability. As the meeting descended into confusion, Ethan stood up, quietly thanked the room, and walked out. He didn't need to say anything more. The power shift was complete. The man they once fined for a driveway now controlled the very ground beneath their community. Over the next few weeks, the HOA tried to negotiate. They offered to buy the parcels back, even proposed joint management. But Ethan had something larger in mind. He didn't want to sell, he wanted to transform the way the neighborhood operated entirely. By the end of that month, he began drafting a new plan, one that would permanently remove the HOA's control and replace it with something more practical, transparent, and fair. It was no longer about revenge. It was about rebuilding what the HOA had destroyed: freedom, respect, and community. Ethan knew exactly how to finish what he'd started. As autumn arrived, the once orderly neighborhood began to change. The crisp air carried whispers of confusion, frustration, and disbelief. The HOA board that had ruled for years was crumbling under its own arrogance. The fines stopped coming. The meetings grew emptier. And Carol, once the self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood standards, found herself cornered by paperwork, complaints, and angry residents demanding refunds. Ethan remained calm through it all. He didn't gloat, didn't shout, didn't confront anyone. He simply let the system correct itself. His ownership of the connecting parcels had effectively dissolved the HOA's power to enforce its rules. Without legal control over the roads, they couldn't fine anyone, couldn't inspect homes, and couldn't even justify collecting dues. The board's influence was over, and everyone knew it. At first, homeowners were skeptical of Ethan's intentions. They feared he might use his newfound authority for personal gain. But instead of exploiting the situation, he did something no one expected. He sent a letter to every household, explaining that his goal wasn't revenge, it was restoration. He proposed creating a community cooperative, a voluntary association where residents could decide how to manage maintenance and repairs collectively, without unnecessary rules or fines. The letter was clear, simple, and respectful. He included a breakdown of the old HOA's misused funds, proving how thousands of dollars had been wasted on legal threats and cosmetic enforcements. Then, he added something that stunned everyone: his company, which now legally owned all the connecting road parcels, would grant permanent free access rights to every homeowner. In exchange, all he asked was that they vote to dissolve the HOA entirely. That vote changed everything. Within a month, the cooperative model was approved by an overwhelming majority. Residents signed the petition to terminate the HOA's authority, and the process moved quickly once the county verified the signatures. For the first time in years, the community felt like it actually belonged to the people living in it, not to a power-hungry board. Carol refused to accept defeat. She filed multiple complaints, insisting the HOA charter couldn't be dissolved without due process. But every claim she made bounced back, blocked by legal technicalities and her own past misconduct. Eventually, even her closest supporters gave up. She resigned quietly, selling her house soon after and disappearing from the neighborhood she once ruled. Ethan, meanwhile, worked quietly behind the scenes to rebuild trust. He hired local contractors to repair potholes and clean the roads, this time, at cost, with full transparency. He posted the invoices publicly and encouraged neighbors to pay only what they could. For the first time, people volunteered their time, helping with landscaping, painting curbs, and maintaining sidewalks. The change was visible. The neighborhood that had once felt tense and divided became open and welcoming. Kids played outside again. Neighbors talked without fear of being reported for violations. The constant fear of letters, fines, and board meetings vanished, replaced by a sense of community that hadn't existed in years. One evening, as the sun set behind the row of houses, Ethan stood at the end of his driveway, the same driveway that had started it all. The paving stones glowed softly in the fading light, untouched and perfectly in place. What was once a symbol of defiance was now a reminder of victory, not through aggression, but through patience, intelligence, and strategy. News of what happened spread beyond the neighborhood. Other homeowners in nearby towns reached out to Ethan, asking for advice on dealing with overreaching HOAs. He became somewhat of a local legend, the man who owned every road in his HOA. Reporters called, articles were written, and online forums began using his story as an example of how ordinary homeowners could stand up to unfair systems without breaking the law. Ethan never sought fame or credit. He always said the same thing when people asked how he did it: I didn't fight them. I just played by their rules, better than they did. Months later, the cooperative officially replaced the HOA in all county records. The neighborhood charter was rewritten, not by lawyers or bureaucrats, but by the residents themselves. Each rule required a community vote, and no one could be fined without unanimous consent. It was democracy in its purest, simplest form, born from the ashes of control. As time passed, the community thrived. Property values rose, not because of forced uniformity, but because people genuinely cared about their homes again. Gardens bloomed. Driveways varied in design and color, each reflecting its owner's taste. And yet, somehow, the neighborhood looked better than it ever had under the HOA's rule. Ethan's company, now known as Freedom Roads LLC, continued to maintain the connecting parcels, ensuring legal clarity and protecting the cooperative from ever falling under another HOA's control. Every year, he renewed the access rights, free of charge, as a reminder of what happens when power is used responsibly. For Ethan, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a message. He had proven that systems built on greed and control could be dismantled not by anger or rebellion, but through patience, intelligence, and persistence. The same rules that were once used to suppress homeowners had become tools of liberation. 1 year after the dissolution of the HOA, the community hosted a small celebration, Freedom Festival, to mark their independence from the old regime. Children rode bikes freely down the very roads the HOA once tried to police. Families set up stalls with food and decorations. And in the center of it all stood a small sign, designed by the neighbors themselves, reading, "Welcome to Fairview, the community that owns its own roads." Ethan smiled quietly as he watched from his porch. He didn't need applause or recognition. The laughter, the peace, the freedom, that was enough. The same HOA that once banned his driveway had, without realizing it, paved the way for something much bigger, a neighborhood where control was replaced by cooperation, and fear was replaced by freedom. And with that, the man who once stood alone against an entire HOA finally rested, content in knowing he didn't just win, he changed everything.